Okay, let's expand on Elara's story, delving deeper into her experience at Silas's ranch and the gradual unfolding of her new, tentative reality. The wind, a mournful voice across the vast, indifferent plains, was Elara's most constant companion in the suffocating dark. It rattled the loose boards of the barn, carrying with it the scent of dust, decaying hay, and the sharp, metallic tang of her own fear. Each gust seemed to echo the hollowness within her, a space carved out by days, how many she'd lost count, of terror and a gnawing, desperate loneliness. Her wrists, raw beneath the bite of coarse rope, throbbed with a dull ache that had become as familiar as her own breathing, shallow and strained. She was a creature reduced to base survival, yet deep within the well of her quiet suffering, a tiny, flickering ember of dignity stubbornly refused to be extinguished. This injustice, this brutal cage, would not be the sum of her. The barn door creaked open, a sound that always sent a fresh spike of dread through her. Light, harsh and unwelcome, sliced into the gloom, momentarily blinding her. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for Jedediah's heavy tread, his cruel voice, the rough grab of his hands. But the footsteps that followed were different. Lighter, more measured. Not Jedediah. A low murmur of voices reached her, one sharp and boorish, Jedediah, undoubtedly, the other deeper, calmer. Elara strained her ears, her heart thudding against her ribs like a trapped bird. They were talking about horses, prices, bloodlines. Ordinary talk, alien to the nightmare her life had become. She pressed herself further into the rough-hewn wall of the stall, trying to make herself smaller, invisible, though she knew Jedediah had her hidden for a reason, a vile purpose she dared not dwell on. The memory of his leering face, his pronouncements of what he intended for her, sent a fresh wave of nausea through her. Then, a pause in the bartering. The calmer voice, closer now. This stall's empty then. Jedediah's laugh was coarse. Good eye. Using it for storage mostly. Got a prime stallion in the next one, though. A real beauty. That black one I was telling you about, Shadowfax, I call him. Elara held her breath. Please, just go. Leave. Don't let him remember me. But the man, the stranger, didn't move on immediately. There was a stillness and attentiveness in his silence that prickled her skin. Smells off in here, the stranger remarked, his tone neutral yet carrying an undercurrent that made Elara's breath catch. A flicker of something, was it suspicion? Or just keen observation? Jedediah scoffed. Old barn. What you expect? Perfume? Place needs a good mucking out, I reckon. A faint rustle, then the stranger's voice again, closer to her stall. Mind if I take a look? Sometimes a good horse is tucked away. Or something else. The last two words were spoken softly, almost to himself, but Elara heard them. A beat of silence. Elara could almost feel Jedediah's irritation, his sudden unease. Ain't nothing in there for you, mister. Just some old tack and feed sacks. His voice was a shade too quick, too dismissive. But the stranger was not so easily deterred. Perhaps it was the way Jedediah shifted his weight, or a flicker of something in his eyes, guilt or fear. Elara heard the wooden latch of her stall door scrape. A sliver of light widened into a rectangle, and a silhouette filled the opening. She cringed, turning her face away, burying it in the straw as much as her bound arms would allow, expecting the worst. A guttural sound of fear escaped her. The man who stood there was tall, his frame lean but solid beneath a worn duster. His face, shadowed by the brim of his hat, was hard to read, but she sensed no immediate malice, only a profound stillness as he took in the scene. His gaze swept the small, filthy space, lingering on the pathetic bundle of rags and trembling limbs that was Elara, on the water bucket kicked over in the corner, the stale crust of bread that was her last meal. For a long moment no one spoke. The air crackled with unspoken things. Jedediah, behind the stranger, began to bluster, his voice laced with a false bravado. Just some vagrant I found sleeping in my barn. Took her in, was gonna see her on her way to the sheriff come morning. Thieving type, I reckon. The stranger's eyes, the color of a stormy sky, finally met Elara's. In their depths, she saw not judgment, nor the leering cruelty she'd come to expect, but something akin to recognition, or perhaps just a deep, sorrowful understanding. It was a gaze that didn't strip her bare, but seemed to acknowledge the humanity Jedediah had tried so hard to erase. He looked at her bound wrists, the raw chafing, and a muscle tightened in his jaw. He said nothing to her, his attention shifting back to Jedediah, his voice now carrying a quiet authority that brooked no argument. Untie her. Jedediah bristled. Now see here, this ain't your concern, this is my property and she's a trespasser. The stranger took a single step forward, a subtle movement that nonetheless made Jedediah flinch and fall silent. The stranger's hand rested almost casually near the Colt peacemaker holstered at his hip. I said, untie her. Or I will. The raw power in that understated command was more potent than any shout. Jedediah, after a moment of sullen defiance, his eyes darting between the stranger and Elara, shuffled forward. With fumbling, angry movements, muttering under his breath about ungrateful wretches and interfering busybodies, he began to work at the knots binding Elara's wrists. The release was agonizing. Blood, thick and painful, rushed back into her numb hands. She sagged against the wall, a choked sob escaping her lips, a sound of pure, unadulterated misery and relief so profound it was painful. Her legs, weak from disuse and fear, threatened to buckle. The stranger stepped into the stall, his presence surprisingly unthreatening in the cramped space. He knelt, not too close, his movements deliberate. "Ma'am," he said, his voice softer now, yet still firm. "Can you stand?" Elara looked at him, truly looked at him then. His face was weathered, etched with lines that spoke of sun and wind and perhaps a sorrow of his own. His eyes, though stern when directed at Jedediah, held a flicker of something gentler when they rested on her. There was a quiet sadness there, but also a steadfastness that was like an anchor in the swirling chaos of her fear. She nodded, a small, jerky movement. With his unspoken offer of support, his mere presence a bulwark, she pushed herself up on trembling legs, the world tilting precariously. He didn't touch her, respecting a boundary she hadn't even known she still possessed, a gesture of innate decency that struck her deeply. "I'm Silas. Silas Blackwood." He paused, his gaze sweeping over her torn dress, her bruised face. "You're safe now." Safe. The word was a foreign country, one whose language she'd forgotten. Could she dare to hope? To trust this stranger who had materialized out of her nightmare? Jedediah watched, his face a mask of fury and thwarted malice. "You can't just take her. She owes me for her keep." Silas straightened, turning his calm, unwavering gaze back to Jedediah. "I reckon I just did. I came to buy a horse. I'll take the mare in the end paddock. And I'll take her." He inclined his head slightly towards Elara. "Consider it part of the price." For her inconvenience, the last words were laced with an icy contempt that made Jedediah visibly shrink. He spoke as if settling a simple transaction, yet the weight of his words, the protection they offered, settled over Elara like a fragile shield. There was no negotiation in his tone, no room for argument. This was a man accustomed to making decisions and seeing them through. The journey to Silas Blackwood's ranch was a blur of motion and exhaustion. He'd helped her onto his own steady mount, a powerful roan, handling her with a surprising gentleness, his touch brief and impersonal on her arm, yet conveying a sense of security she hadn't felt in an age. She rode huddled before him, the warmth of his body a distant comfort against the chill of the wind and the deeper chill of her trauma. Little was said. The vast, rugged landscape passed by, its harsh beauty a stark contrast to the ugliness she had endured. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of bruised purple and fiery orange, mirroring the turmoil within her, yet also hinting at the end of a dark day. Each hoofbeat carried her further from Jedediah, further from the terror. She found herself listening to Silas's breathing behind her, steady and even, a small anchor in the overwhelming sea of her emotions. Silas's ranch was nestled in a small, sheltered valley, a collection of sturdy, well-maintained buildings that bespoke order and care. A thin ribbon of smoke curled from the chimney of the main house, a beacon of warmth in the fading light. Unlike Jedediah's squalid barn, this place felt whole, cared for, tended. There was a sense of peace about it, even in the fading light. He helped her down, his hands steady on her waist, and for a moment she leaned against him, a wave of dizziness washing over her, her legs almost refusing to hold her. He held her for a beat longer than necessary, a silent acknowledgement of her weakness, his arm a firm support, before gently guiding her towards the house. "Easy now," he murmured, his voice low. Inside, a fire crackled in a stone hearth, casting a warm, flickering glow over a simple, clean room. It smelled of wood smoke, coffee, and old leather, comforting, masculine scents that were so different from the fetid air of her prison. An older woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair, her face etched with the wisdom of years, introduced as Martha, Silas's housekeeper, met them at the door. Her initial surprise at Elara's disheveled state, her torn clothes, the dirt smudges, the haunted look in her eyes, quickly softened into a deep, maternal concern. "Oh, the poor dear," Martha clucked, her gaze assessing but gentle. She shot a questioning look at Silas, who merely gave a curt nod. Understanding passed between them without words. Without fuss, Martha led Elara to a small, neat room at the back of the house. It held a simple bed with a handmade quilt, a washstand with a pitcher and bowl, and a small window that looked out onto a burgeoning vegetable garden. "You can rest here, child," Martha said, her voice soothing. She provided Elara with warm water to wash, a soft towel, and a simple, clean nightgown of worn but well-mended flannel. The feel of the soft cotton against her skin after days in filthy rags was an almost unbearable relief. Each small act of kindness, the warm water, the gentle words, the privacy, chipped away at the ice around Elara's heart. Martha even helped her gently bathe the raw skin on her wrists, applying a soothing salve that smelled of herbs. Later, wrapped in a thick quilt, Elara sat in a rocking chair by the fire in the main room, a mug of warm, nourishing broth cradled in her trembling hands. Her body ached with a profound weariness, but it was the weariness of escape, not of continued endurance. Silas sat opposite, in a worn leather armchair, cleaning a rifle with methodical movements, observing her quietly from time to time, his expression unreadable. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was watchful, allowing. He wasn't pressing her for her story, for explanations. He simply let her be. "He won't find me?" Elara finally whispered, the words raspy from disuse, from days of only whimpers and choked pleas. It was less a question, more a desperate plea for reassurance, her gaze fixed on the dancing flames. Silas's movements stilled. His gaze was direct. "Jedediah Stokes is a known bully, but a coward at heart. He won't cross me again. And this valley, it's a long way from anywhere he'd feel brave." He paused, then added, his voice resonating with quiet conviction, "You have my word. You're safe here for as long as you need." Elara looked into the fire, the flames dancing like the fragile hope beginning to flicker within her. Safe. The word still felt tentative, unreal. She thought of her meager belongings, her sewing box with its precious needles and threads, her only means of earning a respectable living, likely lost or destroyed by Jedediah. A fresh wave of despair threatened to pull her under. What was she without her skills, her independence? A burden. Another mouth to feed. The thought was a familiar torment. I had a small valise," she began, her voice trembling. "My sewing things, my livelihood." As if sensing her distress, Martha, who had been quietly tidying nearby, spoke. "Now, don't you worry your head about that tonight, dear. Rest is what you need." Silas, however, seemed to understand the deeper current of Elara's concern. He set the rifle aside. "Martha mentioned you were asking for something to do with your hands," he gestured vaguely. "She has a mending basket that's overflowing with ranch clothes needing attention. If you're feeling up to it, in time. No rush. But good thread and needles we have plenty of." Elara looked up, surprised. It was a small thing, an offer of simple work, yet it felt like a lifeline. A chance to reclaim a piece of herself, to contribute, to not be merely a burden. Her gaze met his, and for the first time, a genuine, though faint, warmth touched her. He saw her not just as a victim, but as someone who might still possess worth, skills. He wasn't offering charity, he was offering in exchange a way for her to maintain her dignity. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely audible but sincere. I am skilled with a needle. It was how I supported myself before, a ghost of pride flickered in her tone, a reminder of the woman she had been, the woman she might, with cautious hope, become again. Silas merely nodded, a subtle softening around his mouth the only indication of his thoughts. He understood, she realized with a start. He understood the need for purpose, for dignity. Perhaps this quiet, stoic rancher who carried his own unspoken sorrows in the lines on his face and the depths of his gray eyes was indeed a kindred spirit. Martha soon shooed her off to bed, insisting on rest. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful, punctuated by dark shadows and the echo of Jedediah's voice. But intermingled with the fear was a new, tentative image, Silas Blackwood's steady gaze, the warmth of the fire, the soft feel of the clean nightgown. The next morning, Elara awoke to the sounds of the ranch already stirring. Sunlight, gentle and welcoming, streamed through her small window. For a moment, confusion clouded her mind, then memory returned, sharp and painful, followed by a dawning awareness of her new surroundings. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was no longer all-consuming. Martha greeted her with a warm smile and a bowl of oatmeal. "Sleep well, dear?" she asked, her tone kind. "Better, thank you," Elara managed, though the dark circles under her eyes told a different story. After breakfast, Martha showed her the mending basket. It was indeed overflowing, sturdy denim trousers worn at the knees, flannel shirts with torn cuffs, heavy canvas aprons. Practical, hard-working clothes. Elara picked up a pair of Silas's trousers, the fabric thick and smelling faintly of horse and earth. Her fingers, still a little stiff and sore, longed for the familiar feel of a needle. There's a good needle and thread in that tin, Martha said, gesturing to a small, lidded biscuit tin. Take your time. Work when you feel able. Elara settled into a chair by the window in the main room, the mending basket at her feet. The simple act of threading a needle, of making the first neat stitch, was profoundly comforting. It was a rhythm she knew, a skill that was hers alone. As she worked, her mind, though still skittish, began to quiet. The steady, repetitive motion was a balm. She could hear the distant sounds of the ranch, the lowing of cattle, the occasional shout of a ranch hand, the rhythmic clang of a hammer on anvil from the smithy. These were sounds of life, of purpose, starkly different from the terrifying silence or brutal noises of her captivity. Silas came in for his midday meal. He nodded a greeting to Elara, his eyes briefly noting the mended pile growing beside her before settling on her face. He didn't comment on her work, nor did he linger, but she felt his quiet acknowledgement. It was enough. He ate his meal with Martha, their conversation sparse but comfortable, mostly about ranch business, a fence needing repair, the price of cattle feed. Elara listened, a silent observer, slowly piecing together the fabric of life in this place. She learned that Silas ran the ranch with only a few trusted hands. He was a man of few words, respected by his men, known for his fairness and his deep connection to the land. Martha had been with him for years, since his wife. Martha's voice had trailed off then, a shadow passing over her kind face, and Elara hadn't pressed. It was clear Silas carried his own burdens. Days turned into a week. Elara fell into a quiet routine. She mended, she helped Martha with small kitchen tasks, shelling peas, kneading dough, always moving with a quiet apprehension, startled by sudden noises or unexpected approaches. The nightmares still came, less frequently perhaps, but vivid enough to leave her shaken and pale in the mornings. She rarely spoke, and less spoken to, her voice soft, her eyes often downcast. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, a change began. The haunted look in her eyes started to recede, replaced by a watchful weariness. She began to notice the small beauties around her, the wildflowers pushing through the dry earth near the porch, the way the light changed on the distant hills throughout the day, the comforting warmth of the kitchen in the morning. One afternoon, a young calf wandered too close to the house, bleating pitifully. It had somehow gotten separated from its mother. Elara, sitting on the porch with her sewing, watched as Silas approached it. He didn't rush, he moved slowly, speaking in a low, calm voice. The calf, initially skittish, eventually allowed him to guide it gently back towards the pasture. There was a patience, a deep-seated gentleness in his handling of the animal that resonated with Elara. It was the same quiet consideration he afforded her. Another day, while she was airing out quilts on the line, a sudden gust of wind whipped one from her grasp, sending it tumbling towards the dusty corral. Before she could react, Silas, who had been mending a bridle nearby, was there. He caught the quilt easily, shaking off the dust before handing it back to her. Their fingers brushed, a fleeting contact, but it sent a strange jolt through Elara, not of fear but of something else, something unfamiliar and surprisingly warm. "Thank you," she murmured, her cheeks flushing. "Wind's picking up," was all he said, his gaze lingering on her for a moment longer than usual before he returned to his task. She began to notice the small ways he looked out for her. An extra log on the fire in the evenings when the air grew chill, a wildflower Martha said he'd picked left in a small vase on the kitchen table, the way he always seemed to position himself between her and any newcomer to the ranch, a silent, unassuming protector. These were not grand gestures, but quiet acts of service, expressions of a care that was as steady and unassuming as the man himself. Her own practical skills began to reassert themselves. The mending basket was always up to date. She even took it upon herself to darn a hole in one of Silas's favorite old sweaters, her stitches so fine they were nearly invisible. Martha praised her work, her eyes twinkling. "You've a real gift in those hands, Elara. Silas hasn't said much, but I see him notice." One evening, as a storm gathered outside, the wind howling like a hungry wolf, a particularly violent clap of thunder made Elara jump, a small cry escaping her lips. She instinctively pressed her hands to her mouth, her eyes wide with a remembered terror. Jedediah had often been at his cruelest during storms, the noise outside masking his actions. Silas, reading by the fire, looked up. His expression was unreadable in the flickering light, but he said, his voice calm and even, "Just the weather, Elara. You're safe in here. This house has stood through worse." His quiet reassurance, the simple statement of fact, did more to soothe her than any coddling could have. She took a shaky breath, her racing heart slowly beginning to calm. He didn't pry, didn't ask about her fear, simply offered a steadfast presence. The trust was building, layer by slow, painstaking layer, like new spring grass pushing through hard winter ground. It wasn't spoken of, but it was there, in the lengthening moments of comfortable silence between them, in the way her shoulders relaxed a fraction more when he was near, in the tentative smiles she sometimes offered Martha and, rarely, even him. She was still wounded, still bore the scars of her ordeal, both visible and invisible. The path to true healing was long and uncertain. But here, on this remote ranch, under the watchful care of a stoic rancher and a kind housekeeper, Elara was beginning to feel the first stirrings of a quiet joy, a nascent sense of belonging. The pervasive sense of quiet dignity that had sustained her in the darkness was slowly finding room to breathe in the light. She was facing injustice no longer, but rather, tentatively, cautiously, facing a new, unwritten future. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, that future didn't feel entirely like a threat. Felt, perhaps, like a cautious hope. Sometimes, in the deepest darkness, a single, unexpected act of kindness can light the way towards hope. Elara's journey of healing is slow, each small step a testament to her resilience. We see her quiet dignity beginning to re-emerge, nurtured by the steady kindness she finds at Silas's ranch. If her story resonates with you and you're touched by the quiet strength of these characters, please give this video a like and consider subscribing for more tales of resilience and courage. What small act of kindness has made a difference in your life or the life of someone you know? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Perhaps share the story with someone who might need a reminder that even after the harshest storms, new beginnings are possible, one quiet moment at a time. There are so many truths left to tell and so much strength to be found in the human spirit. Until next time.